Robert E. Howard died at just the age of 30. And while it seems like he was probably tiring of Conan and was ready to move on to other markets at the time of his death, there's no way for us to know how much more Conan adventuring lived on in his head. Pretty much all of Howard's Conan work, be it published or unpublished, finished or unfinished, has been made available to us by this point. Some of his unfinished work started making the page from the 50s to the 70s, edited by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter, and to a lesser extent, Bjorn Nyberg. They set to expanding the Conan world with their own pastiche. By the end of the 70s, most of that stuff was out. Some of it is good, most of it's mediocre, and some of it sucks irredeemably hard. By 1977, Karl Edward Wagner had firmly established himself as a singular voice in sword and sorcery. He had already published 4 different books of his own sword and sorcery character named Cain. Most people thought he looked a little more at home in a Hell's Angels bar than in the library. He was a hard-drinking Tennessee author who had written a Bran McMorn pastiche, and he would edit different collections of Howard. What I'm trying to say is, if in 1977 you wanted someone to write Conan pastiche and do it well, you would pick Karl Edward Wagner. Wagner felt like there were 2 ways you could approach pastiche. You could try to ape the original author's style and kind of fill in the gaps of a series character's career, or you could try to understand their character at the character level and then write in your own style, trying to stay true to the original author's vision of the character. Because Karl Edward Wagner found the first version tedious, and I think he was taking some shots at L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter there, he chose to do the second version. That brings me to the letters. Now, I have to thank Gary Romeo and Dr. Will Oliver, who are 2 fellow Ray Hoopins, members of the Robert E. Howard United Press Association that I'm also a member of. These guys did all the work here. I'm just sort of packaging their research for you guys right here. So thanks to Gary over at Sprague de Camp Fan and Will Oliver, who wrote The Life and Times of a Texas Author. Great book. He signed it for me at Howard Days. It was very nice of him. So on April 12th, 1977, Karl Edward Wagner had been tasked with writing a Conan novel. He'd actually been tasked with writing 6 Conan novels over the next 24 months, which his agent agreed was going to put some pressure on him. But he was going to make $22,000 per book in 1977, so it was a pretty sweet deal if you could pull it off. His agent Kirby McCauley sent in an outline of his first pitch. It was called The Day of the Lion, and it was to tell the story of how Conan defeated King Nemedides to take the throne of Aquilonia. And if you're thinking, that sounds a lot like Conan the Liberator, the L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter novel, you'd be right. On May 11th, we have another letter from Kirby McCauley that shows that de Camp denied the outline. He sort of thought he had dibs, or at least the right of first refusal, on a couple of Conan ideas, and he was already working on Conan the Liberator, so he denied the outline. Instead, Wagner was going to have to work on something else. 11 days later, McCauley received another letter from L. Sprague de Camp disclosing what Conan Properties Incorporated and de Camp were working on at the time. Now, this letter is kind of an interesting window into what might have been for Conan stories in the late 70s and early 80s. Some of them would come to pass, and some would remain unmade. Our first one is called Conan the Barbarian. This proposed novel tells the story of Conan's younger years, from the destruction of his village by the Aquilonians to the canonical origin story of Conan, where he sweeps over the walls at Fort Venarium when he's 15. It's interesting to see them use this title, since the 1955 Gnome press release and the comic book used that same title. This story seems to kind of mirror some of the events that would eventually be shown in the 1982 movie, and also follows pretty closely to the plot of the novel Conan of Venarium by Harry Turtledove, but that book wouldn't be released for almost 30 years, so it's hard to say whether or not it originally came from here. De Camp and Carter did ultimately put out a movie novelization of the 1982 film under this same name, so it kind of did come to pass in its own weird way. Book number 2 was Conan the Liberator. This one they made, same title and all, and it sucks. It's probably one of the worst Conan pastiches that I've read. It's just not very exciting. Number 3, Conan the Swordsman, was also made, but there are some differences. The King in the Dungeon was renamed to Shadows in the Dark, neither of which is a great title. And then The Eyes of Kali was dropped entirely. They did end up writing another story that takes place after A Witch Shall Be Born, but that story, Black Tears, does not go to Venya. The future plans begin with The Gem in the Tower, which was released in 1978 but is pretty weird since it's a rewrite of a Carter story that was already out, starring Thongor of Lemuria. The Oasis of Death never made it to the public. It's actually kind of an interesting place where you could fill in some story, seeing as they're considering Conan going all the way from Punt to Aquilonia, which are essentially on opposite sides of the Hyborian Age map, but this one sounds rather generic. At least the one-sentence pitch does. The next two stories sound profoundly awful, and I'm thankful that they were never made. The Day of Wrath just sounds mean-spirited and pointless, and honestly, kind of hard to root for. A powerful Conan punishing people is not an interesting concept. Conan is much better when he's on his back foot against impossible odds. And The Son of Conan is a planned novel or collection of short stories about Conan's son Con, and I can't say I've ever found Con very interesting. Con's born in a castle, the Prince of Aquilonia. That's nothing like Conan's upbringing. Stories of the children of great heroes just turn me off in general. Sprague goes on to suggest a Conan of Hyrcania story, alternatively titled Lord of the Black Throne, which it doesn't seem like led to any eventual publication, or a story set between chapters 1 and 2 of Queen of the Black Coast, in which Conan is adventuring with the Black Corsairs on the crew of the Tigris. This one possibly grew into the 1980 Paul Anderson novel Conan the Rebel, which Bantam put out in 1980, but it's only kind of similar. Strangely, Conan the Sword of Skelos and Conan and the Spider God, which would come out 2 and 3 years after this letter respectively, are not in their plans at all. Karl decided to take Sprague up on none of it, and instead furnished Conan the Road of Kings, which ended up being one of the best pastiches of its generation. Despite its title maybe sounding similar to Conan the Liberator, it isn't about Conan taking the throne at all. Instead, it's about the metaphorical road that a man would walk on his path to a kingship. Despite Road of Kings being so good, DeCamp still received pages of quibbling and quarreling objections from DeCamp, from everything to tone to language to characterization, and it really turned Wagner off fast. Gary Romeo also includes on his blog the synopsis of The Day of the Lion, and it sounds a little bit better than the Conan the Liberator novel that we eventually got. I would at least be interested in reading what the final product would have been. In general, Wagner's a lot stronger of an author than L. Sprague de Camp, I think. Karl Edward Wagner personally apologized to Howard's estate executor Glenn Lord, but had decided he was done. He found the whole thing really frustrating and tedious, and according to him, bailed out after just one book. On the movie side of things, I love to see what sort of sequels and prequels might have been made to franchises but never were, and a bunch of pitches come from Karl Edward Wagner. Wagner very much wanted the 1982 movie to succeed because he loved the character so much, but he was very afraid that they would turn it into a kiddie show and it would fail. His worst fears were confirmed when he saw Conan the Destroyer, which was absolutely a kiddie show, and he felt it destroyed the franchise. But a few months prior to its release, Stephen King himself recommended Karl Edward Wagner to Dino De Laurentiis to write a Conan 3 script, and Karl put pen to paper. On August 22nd, 1984, Karl sent Dino a letter titled 3 Concepts for a Conan Film. And all 3 of them sound at least interesting in how they bridge the gap between the Destroyer and the Howard stories. Pitch 1 is largely based on Black Colossus, with elements of Shadows and Zambula thrown in. Conan and a thief named Shavatus try to steal from Thurga Khotan's ancient tomb, and eventually Conan leads the armies of Karaja against the wizard Natak. The cannibal house of Aram Baksh in Zambula shows up in the middle. The second pitch is based mostly on Beyond the Black River, with some of the Black Stranger thrown in. Conan is a scout at Fort Tuscalan, and the main enemy is the Picts, including the pirates Strumbani and Black Serrano. The final pitch is mostly just Red Nails minus Valeria. Instead, Conan rescues an enslaved girl at the start of the script to replace her, even though Valeria from the original film is a lot more Belit than she is Valeria. Karl turned in his first draft of his script just titled Conan 3 on January 29th, 1985. It ultimately weaves together parts of Black Colossus and People of the Black Circle, and he actually kills Conan at the end of it. Though Conan just kind of falls down a pit into blackness, so I suppose you could say he left the door open for future sequels. Dino De Laurentiis came back at Wagner with pages of notes saying that certain things didn't work and that some scenes should be made into more like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's easy to see why Wagner very quickly decided he had had enough of this circus. Italian writer Sergio Allan Altieri sent 2 treatments to Wagner, probably at the request of Dino, but it's not clear if these were supposed to be jumping off points for him to write the rest, or if they were just ideas that he was supposed to take. They're kind of strange. Those treatments, sent March 14th, 1985, are titled Conan the Wanderer and Conan the Ruthless. After David Lynch's Dune bombed, De Laurentiis was extremely cautious about budget, so the writing was on the wall for any Conan movie after that. Dino went from wanting Conan 3 shot in China for $20 million, to being shot in Tunis for much less, to it being shot in North Carolina with basically no special effects and no Grace Jones, since they couldn't afford her anymore. One more draft of Conan 3 from Karl Edward Wagner is dated March 26th, and is basically a budget version of Beyond the Black River, but without the wizard Zogar Sog, and instead has like a big guy named Grolnar as the enemy. It's obviously not ideal, but it was kind of a deft solution to the budget problem, and I would be interested in seeing how it would have turned out. It could have been cool if it had been executed more like the 1982 film than Destroyer, but despite the lower budget, because Dune bombed so hard, it took any wind out of their sails for a big budget movie. It doesn't seem like Karl Edward Wagner ever turned in any more drafts or ever worked on any other Conan pastiche stuff, though he did edit Conan collections and other sword and sorcery collections until he became a victim of his own alcoholism and passed away in 1994. Conan 3 was obviously never made until now, maybe? Christopher McQuarrie, who is great in the Mission Impossible movies, is tapped to write and direct the thing, but we'll see if it ever actually happens. Arnold Schwarzenegger right now is 78 years old and will be 79 or 80 by the time they film, so he's going to be like 81 or 82 when it comes out, if it ever comes out, so we'll see. Let me know down in the comments if you think any of these movies sound cool, or if you have any Conan movies like Crown of Iron that you wish they had made, and I guess we'll all just be sitting here fingers crossed for a good Conan 3.